Shalom, shalom. We're talking about Parashat Noach's two gospel portions. Uh, these uh, are two different scriptures. From Matthew 24, verse 36 to 44, it contains the parable of the fig tree, and Luke 17, verses 20 up to 37, and Yeshua is answering a question from the Pharisees in that regard. It is regarding the coming of the kingdom of God. The Pharisees wanted to know how will they know when the kingdom's coming. Um, Please note again, I'm not going to read the scriptures to you in this video. I hope to encourage you to read it for yourself when we've finished. It's Matthew 24, verse 36 to 44, and Luke 17, verse 20 to 37. In the fig tree parable, uh, we must remember that not to confuse this with the cursing of the fig tree. There is a correlation, a parallel between it, and I will talk about that towards the end. The cursing of the fig tree is an historic event that actually happened, and the parable of the fig tree, of course, is a parable. Uh, Yeshua warned that we can and should tell the season of the end times in the parable of the fig tree. The fig tree's branches, he said, are softening as it prepares to bud out at the start of the summer or in the spring. In Israel, the summers are hot and dry. They have winter rain. So when you see the fig tree budding, you know that summer is at hand. In the parable, the nation of Israel is the fig tree. Yeshua says that when all the signs of the end times appear, then we must take heed. And the signs of the end time, if you read the whole Matthew 24, it will tell you what those are. Yeshua warned us about the time we're currently living in, because if you study Matthew 24, you'll see that all these signs have already occurred. Yeshua said that the generation who witness the onset of these signs will not pass away until the parable of the fig tree is fulfilled. That is in verse 34, Matthew 24, verse 34. The Messianic interpretation and application of the parable builds from the return of the Jews to the state of Israel and the restoration, the rebirth of the state of Israel in 1948. As a generation is considered to be 70, or if you're strong, 80 years old, and that's from Psalm 90, verse 10, it takes us from 1948 until 2018. That's the 7 years horizon. Or 2028. That is the 80 years horizon. I would like to point out that there are some uncertainty in regarding when the count should actually start. We should count 70 and 80 years, but when do we start? It could possibly have started with the restoration of Jerusalem. That was in 1967, when it was liberated. However, the reconstruction of the old Jewish sector only started a year later in 1968, and it wasn't completed until 1975. So which date do we take? There's yet another angle. Jerusalem was not annexed into the state of Israel until 1980. So if we use all these different dates and we keep on adding 70 to 80 years, the latest in history dates that these things will happen when Yeshua will return is 1980 plus 70 to 80 years. That takes us to 2050 or 2060. But that is vague. So we obviously passed 2018, and we are 7 years from, or even less than 7 years from 2028. So where are we? We should, to narrow down possible dates, we should search for sabbatical years, which is every 7 years, or jubilees, which are every 49 years. The jubilee is celebrated in the 50th year, but the 50th year is also the first year of the new count. So the year should be divisible by 49, 7 sabbatical years. So this opens a new can of worms. Which calendar do we use? It's easy to throw away, disregard the Gregorian calendar. There's nothing biblical about that calendar that we follow today. Um, and it may be easy and too easy to adopt the Hillel calendar. Hillel is generally accepted in Judaism and in the Messianic faith or the Hebrew roots movement. Um, but there are several other possibilities on the table which we can't disregard. And issues around Hillel's calendar. Hillel, for instance, did not count the years spent in slavery in Egypt as part of the years he counted from creation. He left those out. So if we use Hillel's calendar, um, the year 5782, which was last year, calculated to 118 49s. So 118 jubilees, which makes this year 5783. This year just started a month ago. 5783 is therefore jubilee. And 5783, as I said, is in the Gregorian calendar 2022 and 2023. Could this be it? I believe this year may be of prophetic significance, but I'm not going to elaborate on exactly what that means because I don't know. If I take the Hillel calendar and I adjust it for the slavery years in Egypt, because that should be counted, at least in my logic it should be, then we have to add on another 430 minus 210 years. That's 220 years that we need to add on. And that makes this year the year 6003 already, which I understand it to mean that if that were true, Yeshua would have been 3 years overdue already for his second coming. So there are more hidden things and mistakes in that rationale. Alternatively, if we expect that human history will last for a full 120 jubilees, that's 12 times 10 number of jubilees, then it could be another 97 years before Yeshua will return. As a remark, I want to say, I just talk about these calculations to illustrate the uncertainty regarding the actual year and date. And we should find rest in what Yeshua say, as he's quoted in Matthew 24, verse 36. Nobody knows. Nobody knows the time except for the Father in heaven. I conclude the date issue then with starting that my personal hope and expectation is to see the return of the Messiah, Messiah ben David, the conquering King of Kings. I expect to see him return within my expected human lifetime, and I hope to see him with my physical eyes when he does. But back to the parable of the fig tree. Yeshua went on to say, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. That is in Matthew 24, verse 35. He was referring to the conclusion of the Messianic kingdom when heaven and earth actually will pass away. And that is when eternity will start. Daily issues will pass away to make room for eternity. You can read that in Revelation 21, verse 1. The crux of the parable of the fig tree is that we must remain busy doing our daily work until he returns. The first Christian assembly or congregation in Jerusalem, expected after Yeshua's ascension and after the Holy Spirit was poured out on Shavuot or Pentecost. They expected that he will return soon. And because of that, they sold all their assets and they consumed their, their asset base. And very, very soon they descended into utmost poverty, to the point that Paul had to ask for collections in the other congregations that he visited to sustain them, because they consumed everything they had. And that's probably the classical example of communism way before Karl Marx ever thought of it. But just like communism in every other place where it was adopted, it led to utmost poverty of the people. Um, there can be no doubt that we must remain occupied until the end. We have to stay alert and encourage each other. The Son of God, the Son of Man as well, is returning at an hour that we do not expect. And that is in Matthew 24, verse 44. I started off by saying don't confuse this parable with the cursing of the fig tree, which were an historic event. That is from Mark 11, verse 12 to 25. But there are certain parallels that we can draw between the parable and the historic cursing of the fig tree. Because both accounts are prophetic in nature. In both accounts, the fig tree refers to the nation of Israel. Yeshua's action of cursing the fig tree when he didn't find fruit of it, in spite of it not being the season for fruit, fig trees have 2 crops in a year, incidentally, but it tells us that in his first coming, the chosen people largely did not believe in him, and therefore they did not bear the fruit that he was looking for. The cursed tree, he cursed the tree and it withered up and died, because he practically demonstrated what will happen to Israel after his death. His prophecy in this action happened as follows. He came, but he didn't find fruit on the fruit tree. And then he cursed the tree. What happened is after his death in the year 70 or 70 AD, Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans. And then less than a century later, in the year 132 up to 135, was the Bar Kokhba revolt against the Romans. And they almost succeeded in expelling the Romans from Israel. But the turning point came when Rabbi Akiva declared Bar Kokhba to be the Messiah. And the moment Akiva did that, all the Jews who believed in Yeshua could not fight or bring themselves to fight in a war for a false Messiah. So they left the battleground. As they left, the Romans squashed what remained of the Israelite army, and because they were so weakened. And this battle and the things that happened that I just described caused a tremendous rift between Orthodox Jewish believers and Jewish believers in Yeshua. And that's why it's so difficult. It's the first step of many more steps, the Crusades and the Inquisitions, that makes it extremely difficult for Jews to come to faith in Yeshua. Well, after the Bar Kokhba revolution, this demon-driven Roman Empire changed the name of Jerusalem to Capitolina. They also changed the name of the country from Israel to Palestine in order to wipe out all memory of the Holy Land. The Romans chopped down every tree in Israel, every single tree, to crucify Jews. And they crucified somebody every mile traveling back from Jerusalem back to Rome. There were no trees left in the land. So when they left, the fig tree nation of Israel was completely withered and dead and devoid of people, empty and destroyed, just like the cursed fig tree that was cursed by Yeshua. The only people left in the land were the Samaritans. Otherwise, the land was devoid of people. There definitely were no Palestinian people, no Palestinians at all. Those people were refugees or escapees from other Arab wars, and they settled in the Holy Land centuries later. The Samaritan people, however, remained in the land, and they are still there today. But they are a very small community, if I remember correctly, maybe 1,000 people or so. They are fully integrated into Israeli society. Well, after the Second World War, a trickle of Jews started returning to the land. They met with huge resistance from the British occupiers, who refused entry to the Jews. These Jews were desolate people and the Brits took no consideration of the hardship that the Jews endured in Europe under the Nazis, just turning them away, sending them away. But eventually, enough Jews returned to the land, and the state of Israel was born in a day, as the prophet Isaiah allured that it would happen. And this day was on the 14th of May 1948. And then the trickle of Jews grew to a steady stream of Jews. And it is quite clear that Ezekiel 37's prophecy about the valley of the dead bones that returns to life were happening. The land also responded to the Jews returning by blossoming. And you can see Israel today is just blossoming and fruitful everywhere. There can be no doubt that the fig tree returned from the dead. And that, more than anything else, is the parable sign that summer is on the way. That takes us on to Yeshua's answers to the Pharisees. They were asking him in Luke 17, verse 10 to 37. They were asking Yeshua when the kingdom of Adonai will come to earth. And Yeshua's curt answer is that the kingdom of Adonai does not come with signs to be seen. And then he cautioned them, he also cautioned us who read it, against chasing after sensational rumors. I confess that I have done that in the past. With all the dark planet and Anunnaki and reptilian hype that developed around the perceived Revelation 12 sign around about 2017 and before, took me up with it as well. I was susceptible to it because I had a long expectation since my teens in the 1970s that I could see the return of the Messiah. This comes from the expectation, as I said before, that 2018 would be a year of prophetic significance because it's 70 years after 1948. My human understanding of the fig tree parable had been proven wrong and humbled me. But my error was heavily based on my hope to see these things come about. And that remains so unashamedly. Yeshua went on in Luke 17 to explain how these end time things will happen. And he's talking about a two-step process. He explained that the first coming of the Messiah, that's himself, was to suffer and to be rejected as the Mashiach ben Yosef, or the son of Joseph, or the suffering servant. I want to take a step back. In Judaism, there's generally anticipated that there could be one or of two possible messiahs coming. One is Ben Yosef, the suffering servant, and the other one is Ben David, the conquering king. As Christian believers in Yeshua, or Messianic believers, we know that both those expectations are correct. It's not either this one or that one, but both. So Yeshua explained then that it will be like it was in the days of Noah, in the days before he returns. The Ben Yosef, or son of Joseph analogy, I've covered that already, I'll go on. In the days of Noah, people were happily going on their daily routine, completely ignorant of what was about to happen. As we await for Yeshua to return, we need to occupy ourselves with our daily activity, but we should not and must not be ignorant of the fullness of time. Sadly, many people are. Those who were unprepared in Noah's time were swept away with the flood. The prepared ones were raptured in the vessel of escape. And I'm not going to suck into pre, mid, or post-tribulation rapture here. It serves no purpose. But we should read the parable of the 10 bridesmaids as well, with this in mind, that those who were prepared entered into the ark. They were raptured from the flood through the ark and were saved. The second step that Yeshua used in his explanation to the Pharisees is in Luke 17, verse 28, 29, and 30. He compared the days of the Son of Man to the days of Lot. Once again, in the days of Lot, everybody was busy with their daily slog, as we must be in our day. Just like Lot and his two daughters, we have to work, but be aware of the times that we live in, and we must be prepared to flee to safety. If you like, Lot and his daughters were raptured to a safe place. I cannot suppress my thoughts of Abraham's negotiation with Adonai before the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. He started at 50 and negotiated Adonai down to 10 people. In both Noah and Lot's cases, the remnant was less than 10 people, so that even Abraham could not negotiate Adonai into a position that would derail his divine plan from unfolding. In the case of Noah, there were 8 people on the ark. It was Noah, Mrs. Noah, the 3 boys, and their 3 wives. In Lot's case, the opportunity to escape the wrath was offered to 6 people, but alas, the 2 about to be son-in-laws, because they were Mekudeshet, engaged to Lot's daughters, they declined the invitation. They stayed in Sodom. And Mrs. Lot, she longed for what they left behind. She wondered, did I switch off the stove? What about the refrigerator? Did I wash all the dishes? She turned to look and turned to a salt pillar. So only 3 people were safe, Lot and his 2 daughters. So note what Yeshua said in Luke 17, verse 32. If you attempt to save your livelihood, you will lose your life. And livelihood, with reference to Lot's wife, it can be your favorite couch, your pillows, your car, or whatever. Instead of putting your trust in your faith, your emunah, in Him alone, in Yeshua alone, if you don't do that, you'll be just like Lot's wife. If you trust in Yeshua, He will save you. With the emphasis on you, He's not going to save your nest egg investment portfolio or the etchings in your hall, because what you will inherit in the dwelling that He prepared for you in His Father's house will far surpass those things. It is time for us to differentiate between the things of eternal value and things of passing temporal value. If you cling to Yeshua, then your things of eternal value will be secure. If you seek Him, He will find you, and He will give you shalom. Shalom is completeness and peace. Amen.